The bitter Montana winter howled against the weathered cabin of Katherine Blackwood as she tended the last embers of her evening fire. Through the frosted window, the distant Beartooth Mountains stood like ancient guardians against the endless sky. 3 years alone on this isolated homestead had taught her to read the land's warnings in ways most settlers dismissed. But Katherine knew the truth. No amount of preparation could have readied her for the wounded Crow warrior who would collapse at her doorstep that night, nor for his brothers who would return with 70 horses and 25 buffalo hides, forever altering the course of her life and the tensions between two worlds. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fading light cast long shadows across the cabin's plank floor as Katherine added another log to the fire. February in Montana territory demanded constant vigilance against the cold, especially for a woman living alone on the edge of Crow hunting grounds. The nearest settlement, Clearwater Junction, lay 15 miles south, a journey few attempted in the heart of winter. Most townsfolk considered her mad for maintaining this isolated homestead since her husband William's death 2 winters ago. A woman alone might as well paint a target on her back, Sheriff Donovan had warned during his last visit in autumn. These are dangerous times, Mrs. Blackwood. Tensions with the Crow are worse than I've seen in years. General Harrison's campaigns have stirred up every tribe from here to the Dakotas. Katherine had thanked him for his concern, while politely declining his suggestion to relocate to town. Clearwater Junction's protection came with constraints she wasn't willing to accept, particularly the persistent pressure from concerned citizens who believed a widow's proper place was under the protection of a new husband, preferably one of the eligible ranchers who circled her modest inheritance like wolves awaiting a feast. The homestead had been William's dream. When pneumonia took him during their second winter, most expected Katherine to sell the property and return east to her family in Pennsylvania. Instead, she had shocked everyone by keeping the land, learning to manage the small herd of cattle and defending her independence with a quiet determination that unsettled her neighbors almost as much as her willingness to trade fairly with the indigenous people who occasionally passed through her property. Katherine moved to the window, watching as snow began falling in thick, lazy flakes from a sky heavy with more to come. The temperature was dropping rapidly. Tonight would bring the kind of bone-deep cold that tested even the most seasoned frontiersman. She added another log to the fire, grateful for the substantial woodpile William had insisted on building before his final illness. A sudden gust rattled the shutters, bringing with it a sound that didn't belong, something between a groan and a whisper, almost lost in the rising wind. Katherine froze, her hand instinctively moving toward the Winchester repeating rifle mounted. Above the door, 3 years on the frontier had honed her senses to recognize potential threats. She waited, barely breathing, as the sound came again. Definitely human, definitely close. Not the purposeful approach of raiders or soldiers, but the labored movement of someone struggling through the deepening snow. Someone injured. Before we continue this story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if Katherine's journey intrigues you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow we've saved something extraordinary just for you. Katherine took the rifle down with practiced ease, checking that it was loaded before moving cautiously to the door. Peering through a small gap in the curtains, she could make out a dark figure struggling through the snow toward her cabin. The stranger moved with obvious difficulty, listing heavily to one side, each step clearly causing pain. As the figure drew closer, details emerged through the curtain of falling snow. A man, tall despite his hunched posture, wearing buckskins and fur that identified him immediately as indigenous. His right leg dragged behind him, and one arm was pressed tightly against his side. Even from this distance, Katherine could see the dark stains spreading across his leggings, blood, freezing in the bitter cold. Logic and frontier wisdom dictated her next actions clearly. Bar the door, extinguish the lights, and prepare to defend herself, if necessary. The tensions between settlers and the Crow had escalated dramatically in recent months after General Harrison's campaign against several hunting camps had left dozens dead, including women and children. Retaliation raids had followed, with isolated homesteads like hers particularly vulnerable. Yet something about the wounded man's desperate struggle through the snow gave her pause. He was clearly alone, injured severely enough that he posed little immediate threat. And there was something else. A glint of metal at his neck caught the lamplight as he stumbled closer. A silver medallion that Katherine recognized from her trading encounters. A peace medal given to Crow scouts who had served with the U.S. Army. The brutal arithmetic of survival on the frontier sometimes demanded cold calculation, but Katherine Blackwood had not abandoned her humanity when she chose this difficult life. With a deep breath, she made her decision, setting the rifle aside but keeping it within reach. She lit a lantern and stepped onto the porch. "I can see you," she called firmly into the swirling snow. "I have a rifle, but I don't intend to use it unless you force me to." The wounded man stopped, swaying slightly as he raised his head to regard her. His face was proud, despite the pain etched across his features, high cheekbones and dark eyes, reflecting the lantern's glow. Blood had frozen in his long black hair, and his breathing came in ragged gasps, visible in the frigid air. For a long moment, they regarded each other across 15 feet of snow-covered ground, a white widow alone on the frontier and a wounded Crow warrior who had somehow found his way to her doorstep. Then, without warning, his strength failed. His good leg buckled, and he collapsed into the snow with a muffled groan. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Katherine moved without hesitation, setting the lantern down and rushing to the fallen man's side. Up close, the extent of his injuries became apparent. A crude splint fashioned from branches bound his right leg. The wood splintered and the binding soaked with blood and ice. His buckskin shirt was torn at the side, revealing a knife wound that had been hastily bandaged with strips of cloth now stiff with frozen blood. When she knelt beside him, his hand moved toward a knife at his belt, the motion more instinct than threat. "I'm not going to hurt you," Katherine said, keeping her voice steady. "You're injured and freezing. Let me help." His dark eyes, glazed with pain but still alert, studied her face with wary assessment. After what seemed an eternity, his hand dropped away from the weapon. He spoke a single word in his native tongue, then switched to heavily accented but clear English. Why help? It was a fair question, one Katherine wasn't entirely sure she could answer fully even to herself. "Because you need it," she said simply. "And because that's an Army Scout's medal you're wearing." The warrior's expression remained guarded, but he nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. "Was Scout for Colonel Jenkins, Fort Kearney." Fort Kearney lay more than 100 miles to the east, a long journey for an injured man in the depths of winter. The fort's commander, Colonel Jenkins, had a reputation as one of the few officers who treated indigenous scouts with respect, which partially explained the situation. If this man had served under him, it was unlikely he was part of the raiding parties that had been striking settlements. "What's your name?" Katherine asked, already examining the crude splint on his leg with clinical detachment. "White Bear," he answered, wincing as she probed the injury. "In your tongue, Thomas." "Well, Thomas," Katherine replied, making a quick decision, "that leg needs proper setting, and your other wounds need cleaning. Can you walk if I help you?" He nodded grimly, and with considerable effort they managed to get him inside the cabin. The warmth hit them immediately as they crossed the threshold, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. Katherine helped the wounded man to a chair near the fire, where the light would allow her to better assess his injuries. Years of frontier life had made Katherine no stranger to treating injuries. Knowledge gleaned from her father, who had served as a field surgeon during the war between the states, combined with practical experience gained from 3 hard years on the homestead, had given her confidence in handling everything from gashes to bullet wounds. Thomas's injuries would test those skills. "I need to remove this splint and see how bad the break is," she explained, gathering supplies from a cedar chest that served as her medicine cabinet. Clean cloths, whiskey for disinfection, needles and catgut for stitching, and herbs she had dried and stored for medicinal purposes. "What happened?" she asked as she carefully began unwrapping the crude bindings around his leg, trying to distract him from the pain. Thomas's breathing was labored, but his voice remained steady. "General Harrison raided winter camp 3 days ago. I was not there, on scout mission. When returned, found." His voice faltered slightly. "My sister's children dead, many others." Katherine's hands stilled momentarily. The massacre near Elkhorn Creek. She had heard whispers about it in town, accounts that contradicted the official story that appeared in the territorial newspaper. "But you're wearing a Scout's medal. Why were you attacked?" Bitterness flashed in his eyes. "New commander said Crow cannot be trusted anymore, that we help raids by giving information, ordered scouts disarmed. Those who resisted." He gestured to his wounds. "I escaped. 3 others did not." The implications were disturbing. If the army was turning on its own scouts, the delicate balance that had prevented all-out war in the territory was disintegrating. And if Thomas's account of the massacre was accurate, the violence would only escalate as surviving warriors sought vengeance. As the last of the crude splint came away, Katherine winced at what it revealed. The break was compound. The bone had punctured the skin before being roughly pushed back and bound. Infection had already set in, evidenced by the angry red streaks extending from the wound. "This is bad," she said, not sugar-coating the situation. "The bone needs to be properly set, and the infection needs to be drawn out, or you could lose the leg, or worse." Thomas nodded stoically. "Do what must be done." Katherine retrieved a bottle of whiskey from a cabinet, pouring a generous amount into a cup. "Drink this first. What I'm about to do will hurt more than the original break." As Thomas drank, Katherine prepared her supplies, heating water for cleaning the wound and preparing a poultice of herbs that would help draw out infection. She selected 2 straight pieces of wood from her kindling pile that would serve as proper splints and tore clean fabric into strips for binding. "You're not safe here," she said as she cleaned the area around the break. "If they're looking for you—" "No one saw me come," Thomas interrupted. "Traveled only at night. Avoided trails." He studied her face with unexpected intensity. "Why do you help? Your people hate Crow." Katherine considered her answer carefully while preparing the poultice. "Some do. Others understand that hatred only breeds more hatred." She thought of William, who had insisted on treating the indigenous people whose land they now occupied with respect and fairness. "My husband traded fairly with your people before he died. He believed peace was possible." Thomas seemed to weigh her words before speaking again. "My brother Red Hawk is war chief now. After the massacre, he will seek blood price." His expression darkened. "Many will die unless truth is known." "What truth?" Katherine asked, sensing they had reached the heart of the matter. Massacre was not mistake, was planned to start war. Thomas's voice lowered. "General Harrison takes Crow scalps, pays bounties to men who bring them. Wants all Crow dead or on reservation where land can be taken." Katherine felt a chill despite the warmth of the cabin. She had heard rumors about General Harrison, a former Confederate officer who had joined the frontier army after the war. His hatred of indigenous people was legendary, as was his ambition to clear the territory for cattle barons and mining interests with whom he had financial ties. "You need evidence," she said, the implications becoming clear. "That's why they tried to kill you. You witnessed something." Thomas nodded slowly. "Have proof hidden." His eyelids were growing heavy as exhaustion and pain took their toll. If Red Hawk finds proof before finding vengeance, maybe fewer die. The responsibility of what Thomas was telling her settled on Katherine's shoulders like a physical weight. The wounded warrior had placed his life in her hands, along with information that could potentially prevent a territory-wide war. If discovered, she would be branded a traitor at best, a collaborator in attacks against her own people at worst. "First, we need to set this leg," she said, focusing on the immediate challenge. "Then we'll figure out what to do about General Harrison and your brother." Creating and telling these historical tales takes considerable time and research. If you're enjoying Katherine's journey, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. It truly makes a difference in allowing us to continue bringing these forgotten frontier stories to life. Katherine adjusted the lamp to provide better light as she prepared for the difficult task ahead. Setting a compound fracture was challenging under the best circumstances. In a remote cabin with limited supplies, it would test the limits of her medical knowledge. "I need to realign the bone before splinting it," she explained, laying out the supplies she had prepared. "This will be extremely painful, but it must be done if you hope to walk properly again." Thomas nodded, his face a mask of stoic acceptance. He gripped the arms of the chair, bracing himself for what was to come. "Bite on this," Katherine said, offering a folded leather strap, "and try not to move." The next few minutes were among the most intense Katherine had experienced since her husband's death. Thomas remained conscious throughout the excruciating process, his only concession to the pain being the white-knuckled grip on the chair and the occasional sharp intake of breath. Katherine worked with methodical precision, cleaning the wound thoroughly with whiskey, manipulating the broken bone back into proper alignment, and applying the herbal poultice before securing the leg between the wooden splints with tight bindings. When she finally finished, both of them were drenched in sweat despite the winter chill that crept around the cabin's edges. Thomas's face was ashen, but his eyes remained clear and focused. "The knife wound needs cleaning and stitching," Katherine said, already preparing needle and catgut. The injury to his side was deep, but had missed vital organs. After cleaning it thoroughly, she made neat, even stitches that spoke of previous experience with such wounds. "You have healer's hands," Thomas observed quietly as she finished bandaging his side. "My father was a surgeon," Katherine replied, washing blood from her hands in a basin of warm water. "He taught me what he could before I came west with William." She helped Thomas move to a pallet she'd prepared near the fire, where he could rest with his splintered leg elevated. The warmth and exhaustion were already pulling him toward sleep, but his expression remained troubled. "My brother will be searching," he murmured, fighting to keep his eyes open. "If he finds tracks leading here." The implication was clear. If Red Hawk and his warriors followed Thomas to her cabin, they might assume she was responsible for his injuries, or worse, that she was holding him captive. Either misconception could prove fatal. Thomas reached beneath his shirt with effort, removing a small leather pouch suspended from a cord around his neck. With practiced fingers, he untied the bindings and withdrew a folded paper, stiff with age and handling. "Treaty signed by Great Father in Washington," he explained, offering it to Katherine. "Promises Crow hunting grounds protected from soldiers and settlers. General Harrison violated treaty, then killed to hide truth." Katherine carefully unfolded the document. It was indeed an official treaty, bearing government seals and signatures, explicitly guaranteeing the Crow tribe hunting rights in territories that included Elkhorn Creek, the site of Harrison's recent massacre. This is why Harrison wanted all scouts killed, Thomas continued, his voice growing fainter as exhaustion claimed him. We witnessed treaty violation, then witnessed massacre ordered to cover first crime. The implications were staggering. If Thomas's account was accurate, Harrison had deliberately violated a government treaty, then orchestrated a massacre to eliminate witnesses. Those actions had triggered a cycle of violence that now threatened to engulf the entire territory. Sleep now, Katherine said, carefully refolding the treaty and returning it to Thomas. We'll figure out what to do when you've rested. As Thomas finally surrendered to exhaustion, Katherine secured the cabin for the night, banking the fire to maintain warmth until morning. Through the window, she could see the snow continuing to fall, already deep enough to make travel difficult. A mixed blessing. It would cover any tracks leading to her cabin, but also make it impossible for them to leave until a thaw came. Outside, an owl called from the darkness, its mournful cry carrying across the winter landscape. In the distance, a wolf answered, the sounds merging into the night symphony that had become the soundtrack of her frontier life. But tonight, those familiar sounds carried new meaning, harbingers of decisions made that could not be unmade, and consequences that would soon emerge from the shadows like dawn breaking over the unforgiving Montana wilderness. Katherine slept little that night, her rest fragmented by the weight of responsibility and the need to check on her patient. Thomas had developed a fever, not unexpected given his injuries and exposure, but concerning nonetheless. Throughout the night, she applied cool cloths to his forehead and administered teas brewed from the herbs she had learned to use for treating infection and reducing fever. In the grey light of early morning, Katherine collected fresh snow to melt for water and assessed their situation with pragmatic clarity. Thomas's injuries would keep him immobile for at least 2 weeks, probably longer. The snow would make travel difficult for anyone searching for him, but it also trapped them at the cabin. Food supplies were adequate for now, but not indefinite. And there was the larger question of what to do with the information Thomas had shared. The treaty violation evidence needed to reach proper authorities, someone who would act on it rather than bury it. But who? The territorial governor was 3 days' hard ride away in Helena, and Thomas couldn't travel in his condition. Katherine couldn't leave him alone, nor could she risk sending the evidence with anyone from Clearwater Junction who might examine it, or worse, be complicit in Harrison's scheme. As she brewed coffee and prepared a simple breakfast of cornmeal, porridge, Katherine's thoughts turned to practical matters. Hiding Thomas would require careful planning. The root cellar provided good concealment, but food, water, and medical attention would need to be provided without arousing suspicion should anyone visit, and someone would visit. Jonathan Taylor, the local trader who had appointed himself her unofficial guardian after William's death, made regular trips to check on her welfare during winter months. His intentions were transparent to everyone in Clearwater Junction. At 45 and a widower himself, he considered Katherine a suitable replacement for his late wife, despite her consistent disinterest in his awkward courtship attempts. Katherine set these concerns aside as she heard Thomas stirring. His fever had broken sometime before dawn, a promising sign. When she checked his splintered leg, the angry red streaks had receded slightly, suggesting the herbal poultice was drawing out the infection. The medicine works, Thomas acknowledged as she changed the bandages on his side wound, which was also showing signs of healing. It should, Katherine replied. I learned from a crow healer during my first winter here. Maria White Elk stayed with me when William fell ill. She taught me which plants help fight infection and which ease pain. Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly at this information. You welcomed crow into your home before? My husband believed in finding common ground. When he fell ill, Maria was traveling with a hunting party. She saw the smoke from our chimney and offered help. Katherine secured the fresh bandage. William still died, but her knowledge eased his suffering. She taught me much during those weeks. As she helped Thomas sit up to eat the porridge she had prepared, his gaze fixed on something behind her. Katherine turned to see what had caught his attention. William's portrait hanging above the mantel. "Your husband?" Thomas asked. Katherine nodded, a familiar ache squeezing her heart. The portrait had been painted during their last trip east, capturing William's kind eyes and the quiet strength that had drawn her to him. "He would have helped you too," she said softly. Thomas studied the portrait before meeting her gaze again. "You honor his spirit by your actions." The simple statement, delivered without flourish or sentiment, touched Katherine more deeply than any condolences she had received after William's death. It acknowledged not just her loss, but her determination to live according to the principles they had shared. Their moment of understanding was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching through the snow. Katherine moved quickly to the window, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Someone's coming," she said, tension evident in her voice. Despite her efforts to remain calm, a single rider. Thomas immediately attempted to rise, reaching for his knife with a warrior's instinct to face danger standing. "No," Katherine pressed him gently back onto the pallet. "Your leg can't bear weight yet, and whoever it is mustn't know you're here." She glanced around the cabin, making a quick decision. "The root cellar. Can you manage if I help you?" With considerable effort and pain that Thomas refused to voice, they managed to get him down the short ladder into the root cellar beneath the cabin's main room. The space was cool but not cold, lined with shelves of preserved foods Katherine had put up during the harvest season. "I will be silent," Thomas promised as she prepared to close the trapdoor. "But if danger comes to you—" "It won't," Katherine assured him, though she was far from certain. "It's probably just Jonathan Taylor making his monthly check." She closed the trapdoor, quickly arranging a small rug over it, before moving to the window to identify their visitor. Relief washed through her as she recognized Jonathan Taylor's distinctive bay gelding trudging through the snow. While the trader's visit sometimes tested her patience with his thinly veiled courtship, he posed no immediate threat, assuming she could send him on his way without him noticing anything amiss. Katherine smoothed her hair and pinched color into her cheeks before opening the door as Taylor dismounted. The trader cut an incongruous figure against the winter landscape, his city clothes and bowler hat comically formal in the harsh frontier setting. "Katherine," he called, removing his hat to reveal a shock of graying hair. "I've brought mail and supplies." "That's kind of you, Jonathan," she replied, stepping onto the porch. "Though I wasn't expecting a delivery in this weather." Taylor stamped snow from his boots before approaching, a concerned frown creasing his forehead. "Word reached town yesterday about increased crow activity south of here. I felt I should check on you." Katherine accepted the parcel he offered, careful to keep her expression neutral. "That's thoughtful, but unnecessary. I've seen no sign of trouble." Taylor's eyes swept over the cabin and surrounding area with the assessing gaze of a man accustomed to evaluating property. "There's been another incident," he said, his voice dropping as though sharing a confidence. "The Anderson place 20 miles west of here. Everyone dead, buildings burned." Katherine felt her chest tighten. The Andersons had a government contract to supply beef to Fort Kearney, she observed quietly. They were underpaying indigenous workers and cheating on their deliveries. Taylor's expression hardened. "That doesn't justify slaughter." "Nor does it justify assumption," Katherine countered. "Rustlers and outlaws are just as likely, especially in winter when food stores run low." "It was Crow warriors," Taylor interrupted firmly. "Army trackers confirmed it. The Settlement Council has requested additional cavalry protection." He paused, clearly uncomfortable with what came next. "Katherine, the council strongly recommends you relocate to town temporarily." "Of course." Katherine's spine straightened, imperceptibly. "And I strongly decline, Jonathan. This ranch represents everything William and I built together." "William would want you safe," Taylor persisted. "At least accept some protection. Young Michael Crawford has volunteered to stay here as a guard. He's a good shot and has made his interest in me and this property abundantly clear," Katherine finished for him. "No thank you, Jonathan. I have my rifle, my dog, and my wits. They've served me well these 3 years." Taylor's frustration was evident in the tight line of his mouth. "This isn't stubbornness for its own sake, Katherine. The situation is deteriorating. You're isolated out here." What Katherine didn't say was that isolation was precisely what she valued. In town, her every move would be scrutinized, her independence viewed as an affront to proper society. Here she answered to no one. The townsfolk tolerated her because she provided medicines from herbs she cultivated, skills learned from Maria, white elk, during that first difficult winter alone. "I appreciate the council's concern," she said finally, her tone indicating the discussion was over. "If you're truly worried about my safety, you might mention to Sheriff Donovan that it's been 3 months since his last patrol out this way." After Taylor finally departed, casting worried glances over his shoulder as he rode away, Katherine returned to the cabin with redoubled vigilance. Taylor's news about the Anderson attack was troubling, though not for the reasons he assumed. If the cavalry increased their presence in the territory, it would only escalate the cycle of violence that General Harrison had initiated. She opened the trapdoor to find Thomas alert and waiting, his expression questioning. "Jonathan Taylor, the local trader," she explained, helping him back to the pallet near the fire. "He brought news of another attack the army is blaming on Crow warriors." Thomas's expression darkened. "Harrison creates reasons for war. Each attack brings more soldiers, more pressure on Crow hunting grounds." He studied her face intently. "Trader man spoke of moving you to town?" Katherine nodded, impressed by his hearing. "The Settlement Council thinks I'm not safe here." "They are right," Thomas said simply, "but for wrong reasons. Not Crow you should fear. Harrison's men search for me. If they find my trail leading here—" The implication hung in the air between them. Discovery would be disastrous for both of them. Thomas would be executed as a hostile, and Katherine would face charges of harboring an enemy of the army, perhaps even accusations of collaboration in the recent attacks. "We need to get the treaty evidence to someone with authority," Katherine said, returning to the core problem. "Someone who can stop Harrison before this escalates further." Thomas nodded grimly. "Colonel Jenkins at Fort Kearney would act on evidence. He is honorable man, but Fort is 4 days' ride in good weather." His gaze moved to his splinted leg. "I cannot travel yet, and you cannot leave Homestead in winter." The conundrum seemed insurmountable until a possibility occurred to Katherine, one that was dangerous but potentially viable. "What about your brother, Red Hawk?" she suggested. "If we could somehow get a message to him, show him the treaty. Evidence before he launches retaliatory attacks?" Thomas considered this, his expression thoughtful. "My brother is wise leader, but anger burns hot after massacre of children. He will listen if I speak, but finding him—" He shook his head. "Hunting camps move in winter, following buffalo herds." "But he must be searching for you." Katherine pressed. "Is there a way to signal him, to let him know you're here and alive?" Thomas's eyes lit with new consideration. Smoke signals could be seen, but also by Harrison's scouts. He thought for a moment longer. "There is Sacred Place 3 miles east, Medicine rocks where crow leave messages for those who know how to read signs. If I could leave token there. Katherine moved to the window, assessing the weather. The snow had stopped, and weak winter sunlight gleamed on the pristine white landscape. I could go, she offered, if you tell me what to look for and what sign to leave. Thomas shook his head firmly. Too dangerous. If warrior scouts see white woman at sacred place, they'd assume I was desecrating it, Katherine finished, understanding his concern. The risk was considerable, but the alternative, waiting for either Harrison's men or Red Hawk's warriors to find them, seemed worse. Show me exactly what to do, she insisted. The sacred place, the token to leave, everything. I'll go tomorrow, at first light, when I have the full day ahead of me. Thomas still looked troubled, but he recognized the determination in her eyes. Reaching beneath his shirt, he removed a small object, a curved piece of bone with symbols etched into its surface. Scout token, he explained. Shows my name sign and clan. Leave this on flat rock with 3 vertical lines of red ochre. He pantomimed the pattern. This tells any crow who finds it that I live and seek counsel with Red Hawk. Katherine accepted the token, recognizing the significance of what Thomas was entrusting to her. And if your brother's scouts find it? They will watch this place, Thomas replied. Test if message is trap. If they believe it true, Red Hawk will come himself or send trusted warrior for meeting. The plan was tenuous, dependent on many factors beyond their control, but it offered a path forward where none had existed before. As night fell again, bringing with it the bone-deep cold of a Montana winter, Katherine prepared supplies for her journey to the Medicine Rocks. Thomas spent the evening teaching her to recognize crow trail signs and how to move through snow without leaving obvious tracks. Neither spoke of the enormous risk they were taking, nor of the unlikely alliance that had formed between them. Instead, they focused on practical matters, the route Katherine would take, the precise placement of the token, the behaviors to avoid that might be seen as disrespectful to the sacred site. As she checked Thomas's splint one last time before retiring for the night, he caught her hand in a gesture that surprised them both. "Why risk so much?" he asked, the question that had hovered between them since she first helped him inside. "Your people would call you traitor." Katherine considered her answer carefully, looking up at William's portrait for inspiration. "Because some things matter more than which side of a conflict you were born on," she said finally. "Because hatred and vengeance only perpetuate suffering on all sides." She met Thomas's dark eyes directly. "And because I've seen enough death in my life. If I can prevent more, even at risk to myself, then that's what William would have expected of me." Thomas released her hand, but held her gaze. "Your husband chose well in his mate," he said simply. "May your journey tomorrow find favor with the spirits who watch sacred places." Dawn broke clear and cold, the sun glinting off snow that sparkled, like scattered diamonds across the landscape. Katherine had risen before first light, dressing in her warmest clothes and preparing for the journey. Beneath her heavy coat, she carried Thomas's scout token, wrapped carefully in a clean handkerchief, along with the small pot of red ochre he had prepared from pigments found in her sewing basket. Thomas remained troubled by her undertaking this risk, but had finally accepted the necessity. "Follow game trails where possible," he advised as she prepared to depart. "Animals find easiest paths through snow, less chance of breaking through deep drifts." Katherine nodded, securing snowshoes William had traded for years earlier, one of the many practical items he had acquired that had proven invaluable after his death. "I should return by midday," she said, checking that her small revolver was secure in its pocket beneath her coat. "Keep weight off that leg while I'm gone." The journey began uneventfully. The crisp air filled Katherine's lungs as she made her way eastward, following the subtle contours of the land that Thomas had described. Wildlife was scarce in the deep winter, but occasionally she spotted tracks of rabbits and foxes in the snow, and once the distinctive print of a mountain lion that caused her to check her revolver's load reflexively. The sacred place, when she finally found it, was unmistakable despite being partially covered in snow. A natural formation of sandstone pillars rose from the white landscape like sentinels, their weathered surfaces carved by countless generations of wind and rain into shapes that did indeed resemble human figures frozen in stone. Katherine approached, with reverence, mindful of Thomas's warnings about respecting sacred places. The specific rock he had described, a flat-topped boulder at the formation's eastern edge, was exactly where he said it would be. Careful not to disturb the snow more than necessary, she uncovered a portion of the stone's surface and removed her mittens despite the biting cold. With precise movements, she painted the 3 vertical lines of red ochre that Thomas had shown. Her then placed his scout token in the center of the pattern. The bone gleamed against the dark stone and bright pigment, its carved symbols clearly visible. Message delivered, Katherine retreated the way she had come, taking care to obscure her tracks as Thomas had taught her. The entire process had taken less than 20 minutes, but she felt as though she had crossed some invisible boundary, her actions now irrevocably linking her fate with that of Thomas and his people. As she began the return journey to the cabin, Katherine couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Twice she paused, scanning the tree line and rocky outcroppings, but saw nothing beyond the occasional movement of branches in the winter breeze. Still, years on the frontier had taught her to trust her instincts. Someone or something was tracking her progress across the snow-covered landscape. Katherine adjusted her path slightly, using a strategy Thomas had suggested if she suspected. In pursuit. Instead of returning directly to the cabin, she circled toward a rocky ridge that would force any followers to either reveal themselves or abandon the chase. As she climbed the gentle slope, loose snow suddenly gave way beneath her snowshoe, sending her sliding several feet down the incline before she could catch herself. The minor mishap became significant when she felt a sharp pain in her ankle. Not broken, she assessed quickly, but sprained badly enough to make walking difficult. Katherine gritted her teeth against the pain and continued her journey, now moving with considerably more difficulty and watching the sun's position with growing concern. What should have been a simple return trip would now take much longer, extending well past midday. The pain in her ankle worsened as she finally came within sight of the cabin. Katherine felt a flood of relief at the thin wisp of smoke rising. From the chimney, evidence that Thomas had managed to maintain the fire despite his injuries. Just 100 more yards across the open clearing, and she would be safely inside. That's when she saw them. Fresh tracks in the snow leading directly to her door. Not animal tracks, but the distinctive imprint of army-issue boots. At least 3 men moving with purpose. Katherine froze, suddenly understanding the feeling of being watched. It hadn't been Crow Scouts observing her journey to the sacred place, but Harrison's men tracking her movements. And now they had found Thomas. Heart-pounding, Katherine moved as quickly as her injured ankle would allow, abandoning caution for speed. As she approached the cabin, she drew her revolver, preparing for the worst, but the scene that greeted her was not what she had expected. The door stood partially open, swinging gently in the winter breeze, but there was no sign of soldiers or struggle. "Thomas!" she called softly as she entered, pistol raised. The cabin appeared undisturbed. The fire still burned in the hearth, and Thomas's pallet remained by the fireside. But Thomas himself was nowhere to be seen. The trapdoor to the root cellar lay open, its rug pushed aside hastily. Katherine moved to the opening, peering down into the darkness below. Thomas. A rustling sound came from the deepest corner of the cellar, and Thomas emerged from behind a stack of barrels, knife in hand. Relief washed over his features when he recognized her. "Katherine," he exhaled, lowering the blade. "You are safe. There are tracks outside," she explained. helping him up the ladder despite the pain in her ankle. Army boots, at least 3 men. Thomas nodded grimly. They came an hour past. Young soldiers, not careful with their approach. I heard them. In time to hide. What did they want? Searched cabin, took nothing. One said they track Indian sign near your property. Thomas's expression darkened. They will return with more men. Harrison's scouts reported the sacred place was disturbed. The realization hit Katherine with chilling clarity. Her journey to leave the token had been observed, not by Crow Scouts as she'd hoped, but by Army Scouts monitoring indigenous sacred sites. She had inadvertently confirmed their suspicions that someone was attempting to contact the Crow. "We need to get you out of here," she said decisively, "if they come back in force." Thomas gestured to his splinted leg. "Cannot travel far, or fast. Would slow you, lead them to both of us." "I'm not leaving you behind," Katherine insisted. "There has to be a way." Thomas studied her face, noting the determination in her eyes, and something else, pain she was trying to conceal. His gaze dropped to her ankle, where wet snow had melted against her boot. "You are injured." Katherine dismissed it with a wave. "A sprain. It will heal." Thomas shook his head, understanding the implications better than she might. 2 injured cannot outrun soldiers, need different plan. Outside, the short winter day was already fading toward dusk. Soon darkness would provide some cover, but also bring bitter cold that would make travel even more dangerous. They needed a solution that acknowledged their limitations while providing a chance for survival. "The Anderson homestead," Katherine said suddenly, her mind racing through possibilities. "You said it was burned, but the root cellar might still be intact. It's abandoned now and the army has already searched it thoroughly. They wouldn't look there again." Thomas considered this, weighing their limited options. "How far?" 15 miles west. Difficult in snow, but possible with the sled William built for hauling supplies. Katherine was already moving to gather essentials, food, blankets, medicines for both their injuries. "Harrison's men will follow tracks from sled," Thomas pointed out. Katherine smiled grimly. "Not if we follow the creek bed. The water isn't completely frozen, and where it is, the ice will hold a sled's weight, but not show tracks like snow." It was a desperate plan, fraught with risk. The journey would be arduous under ideal conditions, with both of them injured, and in winter darkness it verged on foolhardy. Yet remaining at the cabin meant certain discovery when Harrison's men returned in force. As Katherine secured supplies and prepared the sled, Thomas fashioned a walking stick that would allow him to help propel the sled while keeping weight off his broken leg. The simple tool spoke to his resourcefulness and determination to avoid being a complete burden. Darkness had fallen completely by the time they were ready to depart. Katherine had doused the fire and removed all evidence of recent habitation, hoping to buy time before Harrison's men realized they had fled. The night was clear and bitterly cold, stars sharp as icicles in the black sky above. "Creek is half-mile south," Katherine said, checking the bindings on the sled one final time. "If we can reach it unseen, we'll have a chance." Thomas nodded, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Lead, I will follow." The journey to the creek was agonizingly slow. Katherine's sprained ankle throbbed with each step, and Thomas's makeshift crutch sank into deeper snow patches, forcing him to navigate carefully. They pulled the sled between them, its runners making just enough noise to set Katherine's nerves on edge. When they finally reached the creek, the slim crescent moon provided just enough light to navigate by. As Katherine had hoped, portions remained unfrozen, while others featured ice thick enough to support the sled's weight. They followed the waterway westward, the creek's natural twists and bends adding distance, but providing the cover they desperately needed. Rest, Thomas insisted after they had travelled for nearly 2 hours. Catherine's limp had grown more pronounced, and even Thomas's iron self-control couldn't completely mask his pain. They found a sheltered spot beneath overhanging rocks where the creek bent sharply northward. Katherine spread a blanket for them to sit on, while they shared the jerked venison and hard biscuits she had packed. Neither spoke much, conserving energy and listening for any sounds of pursuit. "Your plan was clever," Thomas said finally, breaking the companionable silence. "Using water path to hide trail." Katherine flexed her ankle gingerly, trying to work out some of the stiffness. "William taught me. He said water always finds the path of least resistance, a good lesson for survival." Thomas studied her in the faint moonlight. "You speak often of him. He was good man." "The best I've known," Katherine said softly, memories warming her. Despite the cold, he believed in creating the world he wanted to live in, not just accepting the one he found. "Brave thinking," Thomas observed. "Most settlers take what they want, call it destiny." Katherine nodded, understanding the bitter truth in his words. William was different. He believed we were guests here, not conquerors. She glanced at Thomas. "What about your family? You mentioned your sister's children." Pain flashed across Thomas's features, not physical this time, but the deeper anguish of loss. Sister was called Meadowlark. Her sons were 8 and 10 winters. Good hunters already. His voice roughened. "They died first when Harrison's men came." Katherine reached out impulsively, placing her hand over his. "I'm sorry." Thomas didn't pull away, the simple human contact bridging divides of culture and circumstance. They walk in spirit lands now, but others will follow if Harrison continues his war. The reminder of what was at stake strengthened Katherine's resolve. After a short rest, they continued their difficult journey westward, following the creek's twisting path through the moonlit landscape. Occasionally they were forced to leave the water's course to bypass frozen rapids or fallen trees, but Thomas proved adept at finding game trails that paralleled the creek. Near midnight, exhaustion began to take its toll. Katherine found herself stumbling more frequently, her injured ankle unable to support her weight reliably. Even Thomas, with his extraordinary endurance, showed signs of fatigue, his movements becoming increasingly labored. "There," he said suddenly, pointing with his makeshift crutch toward a dark shape silhouetted against the starry sky. "Building." Katherine peered through the darkness, relief flooding through her as she recognized the stone chimney of the Anderson homestead rising from the ruins of the burned structure. They had reached their destination, or what remained of it. The Anderson place had been a substantial ranch before the attack, a main house, barn, and several outbuildings arranged around a central yard. Now only blackened timbers and partial stone walls remained, skeletal in the moonlight. Katherine led them toward what had been the main house, where the root cellar would be located. The cellar doors, built into a small hillside behind the house ruins, had survived the fire intact. Katherine worked the frozen latch free and pulled one door open, wincing at the groan of rusty hinges that seemed thunderous in the night silence. "Wait," Thomas said, gripping her arm before she could enter. "Let me check first." Despite his injured leg, he maneuvered down the short flight of stairs with the silent grace of a lifetime spent hunting. Katherine waited anxiously, revolver in hand, until he called the all-clear. The Anderson root cellar was larger than Katherine's, designed to store provisions for a family of 6 and several ranch hands. Part of one wall had collapsed, but the rest of the structure remained sound, and the earth provided insulation against the bitter cold outside. A few shelves still held preserved goods, jars of fruit and vegetables that had survived both the fire and subsequent scavengers. Katherine helped Thomas settle onto the sled pallet while she explored their temporary sanctuary. A small ventilation shaft provided fresh air and would allow them to risk a tiny fire for warmth. She found a cache of candles in a metal box and a half-empty oil lamp that would provide much-needed light. "We should be safe here for a few days," she said, arranging their supplies in the limited space. "Time for both of us to heal enough for the journey to Fort Kearney." Thomas watched her methodical organization with admiration. "You do not give up easily, Katherine Blackwood." "Neither do you," she replied, finally allowing herself to sit and properly tend to her swollen ankle. "Most men would have died from injuries like yours, exposed in that snowstorm." "Not ready for spirit world yet," Thomas said simply. "Too much unfinished." Katherine nodded, understanding completely. They both had purposes that drove them beyond normal human endurance. Hers to honor William's vision of peaceful coexistence. His to prevent a war that would destroy his people. She fashioned a compress of snow wrapped in cloth for her ankle, sighing with relief as the cold numbed the throbbing pain. Tomorrow she would search for herbs among the Andersons' garden ruins. Certain plants remained viable even in winter and might help both their injuries. As they settled in for what remained of the night, exhaustion quickly overcame caution. Despite their intention to keep watch in shifts, both fell into deep sleep, their bodies demanding rest after the grueling journey. Katherine awoke suddenly, disoriented in the absolute darkness of the cellar. Something had disturbed her sleep, a sound that didn't belong. She reached instinctively for her revolver, then felt Thomas's hand on her arm, his fingers pressing gently in warning. He had heard it too. They remained motionless, barely breathing, as the sound came again. The unmistakable crunch of footsteps, in snow and ice above them. Someone was walking around the ruins of the Anderson homestead. For several heart-stopping minutes, they listened as multiple individuals moved about the property. Fragments of conversation drifted down through the ventilation shaft, though not enough to identify the speakers clearly. "My tracks ended at the creek. Could have gone anywhere. Colonel wants the area secured before." Soldiers. Harrison's men had followed their trail as far as the creek, then begun searching likely destinations in the vicinity. It was only a matter of time before they investigated the root cellar. Katherine and Thomas exchanged glances in the darkness, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. If discovered, Thomas would be killed immediately, and Katherine would face charges of treason. Their only hope lay in remaining absolutely silent and praying the soldiers' search would be cursory. The footsteps drew nearer to the cellar doors. Katherine held her breath, fingers tightening around the revolver's grip. Thomas had silently drawn his knife, though they both knew resistance would be futile if the soldiers discovered them. A heavy thump sounded on the cellar doors, someone testing if they were secured. The rusty latch rattled. Then a voice. "Cellar's locked from outside. Nobody's been in there." "Check it anyway. Colonel's orders were specific. Leave nothing unsearched." Katherine's heart sank as she heard the latch being worked free. Light began to filter through the widening gap as the door was pulled open. Discovery was seconds away. Then from the distance, a sound carried clearly in the winter air, the distinctive war cry of Crow warriors, followed by multiple gunshots. Instant confusion erupted above them. Orders were shouted, boots pounded across frozen ground as the soldiers abandoned the cellar to respond to the apparent attack. The door slammed shut again, the latch falling back into place by chance or design. Katherine and Thomas remained frozen, listening as the sounds of conflict continued briefly, then faded northward, drawing the soldiers away from the homestead. After several minutes of relative silence, Thomas spoke softly. "And you?" Katherine asked, sensing his hesitation. A ghost of a smile touched Red Hawk's lips, the family resemblance to Thomas momentarily striking. "I believe my brother is alive because of you when Harrison wanted him dead. This earns the right to be heard. It wasn't a complete commitment to their plan, but it was an opening, a willingness to consider alternatives to immediate retaliation. For now, that was enough. In the ensuing hours, Katherine was treated with respectful distance by the warriors. Occupying the medicine cave, the elderly healer, who spoke no English but communicated effectively through gestures, examined her ankle and applied a poultice that provided immediate relief from pain and swelling. Thomas, too, received expert care. His ribs were bound with strips of leather that supported the broken bones while allowing necessary movement. His leg splint was replaced with a more sophisticated version that used carved wooden braces and sinew bindings to provide perfect alignment for continued healing. As night fell outside the cave, activity within intensified. More warriors arrived in small groups, bringing news from various Crow encampments scattered throughout the territory. Katherine observed these interactions from a respectful distance, noting the deference shown to Red Hawk and the organized manner in which information was shared and assessed. This was not the chaotic war council of savages that frontier newspapers depicted, but a sophisticated military operation conducted by disciplined leaders who understood exactly what they faced in confronting the U.S. Army. Thomas joined her, later moving with improved mobility thanks to the healer's ministrations. "Council meets tonight," he explained quietly. "Red Hawk gathers war chiefs from all Crow bands. We'll decide whether to attack settlements or wait for evidence to reach." "Governor," the gravity of the situation settled over Katherine. In this cave, decisions would be made that would determine the fate of both settler and indigenous communities throughout the territory. Lives hung in the balance, including hers and Thomas's. "What will happen?" she asked, watching as more elaborately adorned warriors arrived, clearly leaders of significance based on how they were received. Thomas's expression remained measured, revealing nothing of his own hopes or fears. "Red Hawk will present treaty evidence. War chiefs will speak. Medicine Man will seek vision guidance." His gaze met hers steadily. "Then they will decide if your words deserve trust." As darkness deepened outside, the council formally convened in the cave's central chamber. Katherine found herself in the extraordinary position of being the only white person present at a gathering of Crow war leaders, a circumstance that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. Red Hawk spoke first, his voice carrying authority. Without needing to be raised, he recounted Thomas's escape from Harrison's massacre, his journey to Katherine's homestead, and the evidence they carried of the general's treaty violations. Throughout his presentation, the treaty document was displayed respectfully on a specially prepared hide surface where all council members could see its official seals and signatures. When Red Hawk finished speaking, he gestured to Katherine. "The white woman who saved my brother wishes to address council." A murmur passed through the assembled warriors, some clearly opposed to hearing a white woman speak in their sacred meeting place, others curious about this unprecedented situation. Katherine rose, acutely aware of the dozens of eyes assessing her every movement. She had never imagined addressing such a gathering, yet found herself drawing on strength she hadn't known she possessed. "I stand before you as one who has seen the truth of General Harrison's actions," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "He violates not just your rights, but the laws of his own government. He kills innocents, both Crow and settler, to create fear that benefits mining interests who pay him gold." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "I do not ask you to trust all whites. Many have earned your distrust through generations of broken promises. I ask only that you consider one more attempt at justice through law before war. Claims more lives on both sides." A distinguished warrior with grey streaks in his hair rose to respond, speaking first in Crow and then translating for Katherine's benefit. "Why should we believe white governor will act differently than white general? Paper promises mean nothing when not enforced." It was the essential question. one Katherine had asked herself repeatedly during their journey. Her answer came not from calculation, but from conviction. Because public exposure changes everything. Harrison operates in shadows, creating false stories of raids to justify his actions. If his true motives are revealed before the Territorial Assembly, with evidence this strong, even those who might wish to protect him will find it politically impossible. The council deliberated long into the night, warriors speaking in turn, their words translated occasionally by Thomas or Redhawk, so Katherine could follow the major arguments. Some favored immediate attacks on military outposts, while Harrison's forces were scattered. Others counseled strategic patience, acknowledging the wisdom in attempting political remedy before military action. As the debate continued, an elderly man who had not yet spoken rose from his place near the central fire. Instantly all voices stilled. Even Redhawk inclined his head respectfully as the ancient medicine man moved with deliberate steps to stand before the council. His face was deeply lined with age, his hair completely white, yet his eyes burned with an intensity that suggested tremendous spiritual power contained within his frail frame. He carried a small, intricately decorated bag that rattled softly. With each movement, without speaking, he opened the bag and scattered its contents onto the prepared hide surface beside the treaty document. Small objects, stones, bones, crystals, feathers, fell in a pattern that meant nothing to Katherine but clearly carried profound significance to the Crow leaders, who leaned forward to study the arrangement with reverent attention. The medicine man spoke at length in Crow, his voice surprisingly strong, given his apparent age. Katherine couldn't understand his words, but their impact was immediately visible in the warrior's expressions and postures. When he finished speaking, Redhawk turned to Katherine, his face solemn but no longer adversarial. The signs speak of two paths forward, one of blood that flows until no warriors remain standing, another of difficult journey that requires courage different from battle courage. He gestured toward the scattered objects. Medicine signs show white woman with heart truth standing between worlds as bridge. Rare medicine. The council's atmosphere shifted perceptibly. While not all warriors appeared convinced, a new openness to considering Katherine and Thomas's proposal had emerged. Additional discussion followed, but with less heated opposition than before. Near dawn, Redhawk called for the council's decision. One by one, the war chiefs indicated their positions through formal gestures that Thomas quietly explained to Katherine. When the last warrior had signaled, Redhawk rose to announce the outcome. Council agrees to delay warpath for 7 days, he stated, addressing both his warriors and Katherine. Time enough for treaty evidence to reach territorial governor. In Helena, if justice comes, blood price may be paid through Harrison's punishment rather than through raids. He fixed Katherine with an intent gaze. But if 7 days pass with no action against Harrison, no warrior will be held back. Every settlement within Crow hunting grounds will face retribution for massacred children. It was both opportunity and ultimatum, a chance to pursue justice through legal means, but with the clear understanding that failure would result in devastating consequences. I understand, Katherine acknowledged, recognizing the tremendous concession the council had made in granting this reprieve. How soon can we depart for Helena? Tomorrow, Redhawk replied. When you are stronger, 4 warriors will accompany you and my brother, protection on journey and witnesses to governor's response. As the council disbanded, warriors returning to their preparations or rest according to their duties, Katherine found herself overwhelmed by the responsibility she had just accepted. 7 days to reach Helena, convince the governor to act against a decorated army general, and secure visible justice that would satisfy the Crow Council's requirements. Thomas joined her, reading her expression with the insight born of their shared ordeal. Difficult path, he acknowledged quietly, but right one. Katherine nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence. 7 days to prevent a war. Outside the cave, the first light of dawn illuminated the snow-covered mountains, transforming them into a landscape of extraordinary beauty and equally extraordinary danger. Somewhere beyond those peaks, General Harrison continued his campaign of provocation, unaware that his carefully orchestrated deception now faced exposure. The journey ahead would test every resource of courage, endurance, and conviction Katherine possessed. Yet as she watched the sun rise over the wilderness that had nearly claimed their lives multiple times, she felt a deep certainty that they had been preserved for precisely this purpose, to stand between worlds as a bridge rather than a barrier, to offer a path to justice that might spare countless lives on both sides of a conflict neither had chosen, but both were determined to prevent. The journey to Helena began at dawn the following day. Katherine marveled at the efficiency with which the Crow warriors prepared for the expedition, selecting their best horses, gathering supplies, and mapping the most direct route through mountain passes known only to indigenous travelers. Red Hawk himself would not join them, needing to maintain control of warriors who still hungered for immediate vengeance. Instead, he appointed 4 of his most trusted men to accompany Katherine and Thomas. Stonewolf, a seasoned scout with uncanny tracking abilities. Two Hawks, a younger warrior who spoke excellent English, learned during his time as an army interpreter. Running Elk, a powerfully built fighter whose silent vigilance provided constant protection. And Grey Feather, the oldest of the 4, whose knowledge of sacred medicine rituals would be needed if injuries occurred during their journey. 7 days, Red Hawk reminded Katherine as they prepared to depart. Return with justice, or we seek it our way. Katherine understood the gravity of this timeline. The territorial governor would need to not just hear their evidence, but take immediate, visible action against Harrison. A tall order, given the general's connections and influence. We'll succeed, she promised, hoping her voice conveyed more certainty than she felt. Red Hawk studied her face, then nodded once, accepting her commitment without requiring false assurances. He turned to Thomas, speaking briefly in Crow. The brothers clasped forearms in a warrior's farewell, communicating through that simple gesture a depth of feeling that transcended words. Thomas had insisted on making the journey despite his injuries. The Crow healer had fashioned him a specialized saddle that supported his splintered leg while allowing him to ride without reopening his wounds. His broken ribs remained painful, but were healing well enough for travel. Katherine received similar considerations, with Running Elk constructing stirrups that accommodated her injured ankle. The Crow clearly valued resourcefulness in overcoming physical limitations, a perspective born of necessity in their challenging environment. As they departed, Katherine glanced back at the medicine cave where dozens of warriors remained, preparing for war while grudgingly granting this chance for peace. The weight of those lives and the countless others who would be affected by their success or failure settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. They followed game trails unknown to most white travelers, moving with the swift confidence of those intimately familiar with the landscape. Stonewolf led, identifying paths through seemingly impassable terrain, narrow passages between towering rock faces, hidden valleys that provided shelter from winter winds, streams that could be safely crossed despite treacherous ice. By midday, they had covered an impressive distance, pushing their horses at a pace that would have been impossible on conventional routes. As they paused to rest the animals, two Hawks approached Katherine. "Governor Harrison," he said without preamble. "What kind of man is he?" Katherine considered the question carefully. She had met Governor Henderson once, briefly, during a territorial fair in Helena 2 years earlier. "Politically ambitious," she replied honestly, "but not corrupt. From what I've heard, he values his reputation for fairness. Two Hawks nodded, absorbing this assessment. We'll care more about miners' gold or crow lives? It was the essential question, one Katherine had asked herself repeatedly during their planning. He'll care most about his political future, she answered, if we make it clear that supporting Harrison would damage his reputation irreparably, while acting against him would be seen as principled leadership. Politics, Two Hawks observed with unexpected cynicism. Same in Crow Council or white government. Men seek power, use others' words to find path to it. The insight revealed a sophisticated understanding of human nature that transcended cultural boundaries. Katherine found herself revising her assumptions about the young warrior. Clearly, his time as an interpreter had provided education beyond mere language translation. As they resumed their journey, Katherine rode beside Thomas, whose stoic endurance masked the pain his injuries surely caused with each jolt of the horse beneath him. "Your brother granted us 7 days," she said. "Is that enough time?" Thomas's expression remained measured, revealing nothing of his own doubts. "Must be. Red Hawk holds warriors back against their wishes. Many lost family at Elkhorn Creek. Blood calls for blood in our way. Not so different from settlers seeking revenge after raids," Katherine observed. Thomas glanced at her, approval flickering in his dark eyes. "Grief makes all people same, blinds wisdom, feeds anger." It was a profound truth, simply stated. The universal human tendency to seek vengeance when wounded, regardless of culture or background. Breaking that cycle required exceptional courage from leaders on both sides. Their path took them through a series of elevated valleys, each offering breathtaking vistas of snow-covered peaks stretching to the horizon. Despite the urgency of their mission, Katherine couldn't help feeling momentary awe at the wild grandeur surrounding them, a landscape that dwarfed human concerns with its ancient, indifferent majesty. As afternoon faded toward evening, Stonewolf led them to a sheltered canyon where vertical rock walls provided protection from wind and concealment. From potential observers, a small stream, partially frozen but still flowing, provided water for both horses and riders. The warriors established camp with practiced efficiency. Grey Feather built a small, nearly smokeless fire using techniques Katherine had never seen before. Running Elk secured the horses, while Two Hawks prepared a meal of pemmican, supplemented with herbs that added surprising flavor to the concentrated trail food. Katherine watched these preparations with growing appreciation for their sophisticated survival knowledge, derived from generations of living in harmony with this demanding environment. Most settlers viewed the indigenous people as primitive, yet their mastery of this landscape far exceeded anything European traditions had developed. "How far to Helena?" she asked as they gathered around the fire for warmth and nourishment. Stonewolf, who rarely spoke but missed nothing, used a stick to draw a crude map in the dirt. He indicated their current position, then traced the route ahead through a series of passes and valleys before marking Helena's location. 3 days, Two Hawks translated, studying the map. "If weather holds, storm coming from northwest." He pointed toward distant clouds barely visible against the darkening sky. 3 days of good travel would place them in Helena by the 4th day of their 7-day timeline, leaving precious little time to locate the governor, present their evidence, and secure concrete action against Harrison. The approaching storm could further compress that schedule if it forced delays. As night deepened around them, Katherine found herself battling anxiety over these tight margins. Thomas noticed her restlessness and moved to sit beside her at the fire's edge. "Worry steals strength needed for journey," he observed quietly. Katherine managed a small smile, easier said than dismissed. "Focus on next step only," Thomas advised, his calm presence oddly reassuring despite their predicament. "Cannot control storm or governor's mind, can control how we prepare, how we present truth when time comes." His practical wisdom cut through her spiraling concerns. Katherine nodded, taking a deep breath of the crisp mountain air. One step at a time. Like crossing river on stones, Thomas agreed. Look too far ahead, fall in water. The simple analogy brought unexpected laughter, a moment of lightness that drew curious glances from the warriors across the fire. The sound seemed out of place in their desperate circumstances, yet somehow essential to maintaining the human spirit that drove their mission. That night, as Katherine settled into the surprisingly comfortable bedroll Grey Feather had prepared, for her, she found herself reflecting on the extraordinary path that had led her to this moment, sleeping under Montana stars, surrounded by Crow warriors, racing against time to prevent a territory-wide war. William would never have imagined this outcome when they first claimed their homestead 3 years ago, yet she suspected he would approve of her choices. His vision had always extended beyond the boundaries others accepted, seeing potential for cooperation where most saw only conflict. Before dawn, Stone Wolf roused the camp. The approaching storm had accelerated overnight, dark clouds now dominating the western horizon. Speed became essential if they hoped to cross the most exposed mountain passes before the blizzard struck. They traveled hard through the morning, pushing both horses and riders to their limits. Katherine's ankle throbbed with renewed pain, and Thomas's tight expression revealed his own struggle against his injuries, but neither requested rest or easier pacing. By midday, snowflakes began swirling around them, at first just scattered harbingers, then increasing steadily until visibility diminished to mere yards ahead. Stone Wolf altered their route, leading them toward what appeared to be a solid rock face until a narrow fissure revealed itself, a passage barely wide enough for horses to traverse single file. The crevice opened into a remarkable hidden valley, completely surrounded by towering cliffs. Here the storm's fury was somewhat muted, the wind diverted by natural stone battlements rising hundreds of feet overhead. "Ancient place," Two Hawks explained as they navigated across the valley floor. "Stories say Crow people sheltered here during Great Winter when snow did not stop falling for a moon cycle." Katherine could imagine how this protected basin might have saved an entire band during catastrophic weather. Another example of how intimately the Crow understood their territory's resources and challenges. They made camp earlier than planned, recognizing the futility of traveling in deteriorating conditions. Stone Wolf located a cave opening large enough to shelter both people and horses, a crucial advantage as the temperature plummeted with the storm's intensification. Inside, Grey Feather discovered evidence of previous occupation, ancient fire rings and faded pictographs on the walls depicting hunters pursuing what appeared to be mammoth and giant bison. The images, created by unknown hands centuries or perhaps millennia earlier, connected their present crisis to the timeless human struggle for survival in this unforgiving landscape. "Old One's medicine strong here," Grey Feather commented in his limited English, the first words Katherine had heard him speak directly to her. "Dreams will come tonight. Listen carefully." Katherine wasn't entirely sure what he meant, but she nodded respectfully, unwilling to dismiss wisdom from traditions different from her own. After all, her European medical knowledge had proven no more effective than Crow healing practices during their journey, indeed often less so. The storm raged through the night, howling around the cave entrance like hungry wolves seeking entry. Despite these ominous sounds, Katherine fell into deep slumber almost immediately, her exhausted body surrendering to sleep's healing embrace. She dreamed of standing on a high promontory overlooking a vast plain where two great armies approached each other. One the blue uniformed cavalry, the other indigenous warriors from multiple tribes united in common cause. Between these forces, a lone figure stood, a woman whose features Katherine couldn't distinguish, but whose posture radiated both vulnerability and uncompromising strength. As the armies closed distance, the woman raised her hands, and suddenly the ground between the forces erupted into a garden of impossible flowers, blooms of such vivid color and beauty that both sides halted their advance in wonder. Katherine woke with this image still vivid in her mind, the dream's symbolism resonating with their mission. Greyfeather sat nearby, watching her with knowing eyes. He had been waiting for her awakening, apparently anticipating the dream's arrival. "You saw," he stated rather than asked. Katherine nodded, surprised by his certainty. A woman standing between armies, flowers growing where battle should be. Greyfeather's weathered face revealed satisfaction. "Old ones speak through dreams in this place, show possible path, not certain future." He gestured toward the cave entrance, where pale light indicated dawn's arrival. "Storm past, journey continues." Indeed, when they emerged from the cave, they found the valley transformed, blanketed in fresh snow that sparkled blindingly in the morning sun. The storm had moved eastward, leaving behind pristine conditions and crystal-clear skies. Stonewolf studied their surroundings, then pointed toward a barely perceptible gap in the cliffs to the southeast. "That way faster now," Two Hawks translated. Storm cleared old rockfall from Secret Pass. This unexpected development reinvigorated their spirits. If Stonewolf's assessment proved correct, they might make up time lost to the storm, perhaps even reaching Helena earlier than originally estimated. The hidden pass proved challenging but navigable, a narrow defile that wound between towering rock formations before emerging onto a plateau, offering spectacular views of the valley below. From this vantage point, Katherine could see, scattered, homesteads in the distance, evidence they were approaching more settled territories. "Must be careful now," Thomas cautioned, noting her recognition of these signs of civilization. "Harrison may have patrols watching approaches to Helena." It was a sobering reminder that while the natural challenges of their journey might be diminishing, the human dangers were increasing proportionally. They adjusted their approach accordingly, traveling through forests and ravines whenever possible, avoiding open spaces that might expose them to distant observers. By nightfall, they had reached the foothills that marked Helena's outer territory. The territorial capital lay just a day's journey ahead, a final push that would bring them to the crucial confrontation their entire mission had built toward. They made camp in a dense pine forest, foregoing a fire despite the cold to avoid detection. As they shared a cold meal of jerked venison and pemmican, Two Hawks raised a critical question. "How do we approach Governor?" he asked. "Territorial capital has soldiers, officials, will not welcome Crow warriors riding into town." It was a practical concern they had discussed briefly during planning, but now required immediate resolution. Katherine considered the options, evaluating risks against their dwindling timeline. "I should go alone initially," she suggested. "A white woman will raise fewer immediate alarms. I can request an audience with Governor Henderson, explain enough to secure a private meeting where all of you can present evidence directly." Running Elk, who had remained largely silent throughout their journey, shook his head emphatically. Two Hawks translated his objection. Harrison's men watched Governor's office, would recognize Katherine Blackwood from descriptions circulated after escape from Homestead. Thomas nodded in agreement. "Too dangerous, need different approach." Stonewolf spoke at length in Crow, gesturing occasionally toward Helena's direction. When he finished, Two Hawks provided translation. Stonewolf knows territorial legislator who supported fair hunting rights in past. Man named Peterson, has home outside Helena, where we might find safer welcome than Governor's office, could provide proper introduction. This suggestion offered a potential solution to their dilemma, approaching the governor through an intermediary who might lend credibility to their accusations against Harrison. "Does this Peterson know you're coming?" Katherine asked, concerned. "About surprising someone who might react with alarm to Crow warriors appearing at his door." Stonewolf shook his head. Two Hawks explained, Last met 3 summers ago during hunting rights negotiation. Man treated Crow representatives with respect, honored words spoken, unusual for white official. It wasn't ideal, but given their constraints, approaching a potentially sympathetic legislator seemed their best option for gaining access to the governor without immediate interference from Harrison's allies. They departed before dawn, moving with increased caution as they navigated the transitional lands between wilderness and settlement. By mid-morning, they reached a vantage point overlooking Helena, the territorial capital sprawling across its valley like a haphazard collection of structures that had grown without coherent planning, which indeed it had. Stone Wolf indicated a substantial homestead standing apart from the main settlement, Peterson's property, according to his knowledge. They approached cautiously, watching for any sign of military presence that might indicate a trap. The homestead appeared peaceful. Smoke rising from the chimney, horses in the corral, no unusual activity visible from their observation point in the surrounding forest. After careful surveillance, they determined their next steps. Katherine and Thomas would approach the house directly, presenting themselves as travelers seeking assistance, a partial truth that would allow initial contact without immediately revealing their full purpose. The warriors would remain hidden but within, signaling distance, ready to intervene if necessary. As they rode toward the homestead's main house, Katherine felt tension coiling within her. This moment represented their first real engagement with settled society since fleeing her cabin days earlier. How they were received here would likely determine the success or failure of their entire mission. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, tall, broad-shouldered, with a full beard shot through with grey. He watched their approach with the wary assessment of someone accustomed to unexpected visitors on the frontier, but taking no chances with them. "That's far enough," he called when they were within conversational distance. Not overtly hostile, but clearly cautious. "State your business." Katherine reined her horse to a stop, keeping her hands visible. "Are you Mr. Peterson, the territorial legislator?" The man's eyebrows rose slightly at the question. "I am. And you are?" "My name is Katherine Blackwood. This is Thomas White Bear. We've come with urgent information for Governor Henderson regarding General Harrison's activities in Crow territory." Peterson's expression shifted from cautious to alert. "Mrs. Blackwood of Clearwater Junction, there are soldiers searching for you. Serious accusations involving collaboration with hostile Indians." The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Peterson could either welcome them or raise an immediate alarm. Katherine met his gaze steadily, gambling everything on her assessment of his character. "Those accusations come from the very man we've come to expose. General Harrison has violated government treaties, orchestrated attacks on both settlers, and grow to justify a campaign that benefits mining interests who pay him personally." She gestured toward Thomas. "We have documentary evidence and eyewitness testimony that proves these crimes." Peterson studied them intently, his gaze lingering on Thomas's splintered leg and the evidence of their difficult journey written in their weathered appearances. After a long moment, he made his decision. "Come inside, quickly, before you're spotted from the road." Relief surged through Katherine as they dismounted and followed Peterson toward the house. Thomas gave a subtle signal toward the forest edge where their companions waited, indicating the initial contact had gone well. The interior of Peterson's home revealed a man of education and comfortable means. Bookshelves lined the walls, quality furniture filled the rooms, and the overall atmosphere suggested civilized living despite the frontier setting. A woman appeared. From what Katherine presumed was the kitchen, Peterson's wife, her expression reflecting surprise at the unexpected visitors, but no alarm at Thomas's clearly indigenous identity. "Martha, these people need help and privacy," Peterson explained briefly. "Could you bring refreshments while we talk in my study?" Mrs. Peterson nodded without question, disappearing to fulfill the request, while her husband led them to a book-lined room at the rear of the house. Once inside, with the door closed, Peterson's demeanor shifted from cautious to intensely focused. "Now, tell me everything, and be quick about it. If what you say about Harrison is true, we don't have much time. Before his men connect your disappearance to Helena." Katherine and Thomas took turns, presenting their evidence. The treaty document, Thomas's eyewitness account of Harrison's orders to kill Army scouts who had witnessed treaty violations, Katherine's testimony about the general's orchestration of attacks blamed on Crow to justify his campaign. Peterson listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. When they finished, he rose and paced the small confines of his study. "This is explosive material," he acknowledged, "and entirely consistent with suspicions some of us have harbored about Harrison's methods and motives." He turned to face them directly, but accusations against a decorated army general require absolute proof to overcome his defenders' inevitable counterattacks. "The treaty document provides that proof," Katherine insisted, "combined with Thomas's first-hand account, which will be dismissed as the testimony of a hostile Indian by Harrison's allies." Peterson interrupted, his tone not unkind but realistic. "We need more to convince the governor to take immediate action." Thomas leaned forward. "4 Crow warriors wait nearby. All witnessed massacre at Elkhorn Creek. All saw Harrison order execution of loyal scouts." Peterson's eyebrows rose. "You brought Crow warriors to Helena? In the current climate of tension, they risked everything to pursue justice through proper channels rather than immediate retaliation," Katherine explained urgently. "Their leader granted 7 days to secure action against Harrison before launching counterattacks. 3 of those days are already gone." The legislator absorbed this information, its implications clearly troubling him. "So we face either exposing Harrison's crimes immediately or watching the territory descend into open warfare within days." "Yes," Thomas confirmed simply. Peterson's decision came with the decisive clarity of a man accustomed to political calculation. "We need to approach this carefully. The governor is hosting a territorial development meeting tomorrow morning. Representatives from mining interests, railroad investors, and military officials discussing expansion opportunities." He smiled grimly. "Harrison himself is scheduled to present his pacification progress report directly to the assembled dignitaries. It provides the perfect opportunity to confront him with evidence of his crimes before witnesses too numerous and varied for a cover-up." Katherine felt hope rising. The governor would have to respond publicly rather than deferring the matter. "Precisely." Peterson moved to his desk, withdrawing paper and pen. "I'll arrange credentials for you to attend as my special guests. The Crow witnesses should remain hidden until the confrontation begins. Their sudden appearance will prevent Harrison from controlling the narrative once accusations are made." The plan took shape over the next hour, a carefully orchestrated public exposure that would force immediate response rather than bureaucratic delay. Peterson's position as respected legislator would provide initial credibility, while the dramatic presentation of evidence and witnesses would create a political situation the governor couldn't ignore without damaging his own standing. As evening approached, Peterson insisted Katherine and Thomas remain at his home rather than returning to their companions in the forest. "My groundskeeper's cottage is currently vacant. Your Crow allies can shelter there unseen until tomorrow's meeting." 2 Hawks was dispatched to bring the others, slipping through gathering darkness to reach their hidden position and guide them to the cottage. Peterson's wife prepared a substantial meal, the first properly cooked food Katherine had enjoyed since fleeing her homestead. As they ate, Martha Peterson revealed herself as politically astute as her husband. "Harrison has powerful friends in the territorial legislature," she observed. particularly Senator Wilcox, who holds significant investments in the very mining operations you've mentioned. Peterson nodded grimly. Wilcox will certainly be present tomorrow. He'll attempt to discredit your evidence and protect Harrison. Then we must ensure the evidence speaks so clearly that even his allies cannot dismiss it, Katherine replied, determination hardening her resolve. Later that night, with arrangements complete and their Crow allies settled in the groundskeeper's cottage, Katherine found herself unable to sleep, despite exhaustion. She stood by the window of the guest room Peterson had provided, watching moonlight illuminate the territorial capital in the distance. Tomorrow would determine whether their extraordinary journey had been worthwhile or futile, whether justice would prevail or war would engulf the territory. The responsibility weighed heavily, yet Katherine found herself drawing strength from the challenges already overcome. A soft knock at her door revealed Thomas, similarly sleepless despite his need for rest. "Last night before battle," he observed quietly. "Different weapons than Crow warriors usually carry, but battle nonetheless." Katherine nodded in agreement. "Words and evidence instead of arrows and rifles, but the stakes are just as high." "Higher," Thomas corrected. "Regular battle kills bodies. Tomorrow's battle determines whether peace possible between our peoples or hatred wins final victory." His profound understanding of what truly hung in the balance reminded Katherine why this mission mattered beyond their immediate concerns. They weren't just seeking justice for specific wrongs, but fighting for the possibility of a different future, one where coexistence might replace endless cycles of violence and retribution. As they stood together at the window, the moon casting their shadows across the floor behind them, Katherine felt a moment of perfect clarity. Whatever happened tomorrow, they had already achieved something remarkable. A Crow warrior and a white settler widow had formed an alliance based on shared commitment to justice that transcended the boundaries others accepted as immutable. "We should try to sleep," she said finally. "Tomorrow will demand all our strength and focus." Thomas nodded, turning to leave. At the doorway he paused. "Katherine Blackwood," he said, her name sounding formal yet intimate in his accented English. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you have walked warrior's path with courage. My people will remember this, even if white people forget." The simple tribute touched Katherine deeply, recognition of her commitment from someone whose approval she had come to value above most others. "And I will remember that the bravest man I've ever known was a Crow warrior who believed justice was worth pursuing, even when history suggested it might prove elusive." Thomas acknowledged this exchange of respect with a slight bow before departing. Katherine returned to bed, finding that their conversation had somehow calmed her restless thoughts. Sleep came more easily now, carrying her toward the confrontation that would determine not just her fate, but potentially the future of relations between settlers and indigenous people throughout the territory. Dawn arrived with crystalline clarity. The sky above Helena, a perfect blue that belied the tensions gathering below. Peterson provided appropriate clothing for Katherine and Thomas, attire that would allow them to blend into the territorial meeting without immediately drawing attention to themselves. For Katherine, this meant a proper dress rather than the practical frontier clothing she had worn throughout their journey. The transformation was jarring after so many days of survival-focused existence. Thomas, too, received civilized attire, clothing that would mark him as an Indian agent rather than a Crow warrior, a disguise Peterson suggested would facilitate their entry into the meeting. "Remember," Peterson advised as they prepared to depart, "timing is crucial. Allow Harrison to begin his presentation before challenging his claims. When the confrontation begins, I'll signal your warriors to enter with the treaty document." The territorial government building sat at Helena's center, an imposing structure of stone and timber that represented the most substantial architecture in the otherwise rustic settlement. As they approached, Katherine noted military presence around the perimeter, soldiers checking credentials of those entering for the special session. Peterson led them confidently past these guards, his status as legislator securing admission, without detailed scrutiny of his companions. Inside, the main chamber buzzed with activity, territorial officials, business leaders, and military officers gathering for what they expected to be a routine development meeting. Katherine scanned the room, quickly identifying Governor Henderson at the front, a solidly built man with a well-groomed beard and the practiced smile of a career politician. Near him stood a figure whose very posture radiated military authority, General Harrison himself, resplendent in a dress uniform adorned with medals and commendations. Seeing him in person sent a jolt through Katherine. This was the man responsible for the Elkhorn Creek massacre, for the attempts on Thomas's life, for the orchestrated attacks designed to provoke war that would benefit his mining partners. He looked not like a monster, but like a respected leader, his confident bearing and distinguished appearance masking the corruption beneath. Thomas tensed beside her, his hand instinctively moving toward where a weapon would normally be carried. Katherine touched his arm gently, a reminder of their strategy and the importance of patience. They took seats near the back of the chamber. As proceedings began, formal welcomes and introductions of dignitaries present, Katherine noticed several wealthy-looking men seated prominently near the governor, one of whom Peterson discreetly identified as Senator Wilcox, Harrison's primary political ally and mining investor. When Harrison rose to deliver his presentation on territorial security, the room fell respectfully silent. His voice carried powerfully through the chamber, a commanding baritone accustomed to battlefield orders and political oratory alike. Gentlemen, I come before you today with both encouraging progress and sobering challenges regarding our pacification efforts with hostile Indian elements in the territory. As Harrison launched into a completely fabricated account of Crow unprovoked aggression and the Army's measured response to protect settlers, Katherine watched Peterson carefully. The legislator had positioned himself strategically near a side entrance where the Crow witnesses waited, ready to signal their entrance at the crucial moment. Thomas sat beside her, his face an impassive mask that revealed nothing of the rage he must feel, hearing his people slandered by the man who had massacred children at Elkhorn Creek. His control impressed Katherine immensely. The discipline of someone who understood that justice required strategic patience rather than emotional reaction. Harrison continued his presentation, describing elaborate defensive measures that were, in reality, provocative incursions into treaty-protected hunting grounds. As he approached the section addressing the Elkhorn Creek incident, Peterson caught Katherine's eye and nodded slightly. It was time. Taking a deep breath, Katherine rose from her seat. The unexpected movement during Harrison's presentation drew immediate attention throughout the chamber. "General Harrison," she called, her voice clear and steady despite her pounding heart. "I challenge your account of events at Elkhorn Creek. What you describe as a defensive engagement against hostile forces was in fact a massacre of peaceful families, including women and children." Shocked murmurs rippled through the assembled dignitaries. Harrison stared at her with momentary confusion before recognition dawned in his eyes. "Mrs. Blackwood," he recovered smoothly, "you appear to have been misled by sympathizers with the hostile elements we're discussing. Please take your seat and allow—" "I witnessed your men executing Army scouts who refused to participate in the massacre," Thomas interrupted, standing beside Katherine. "Scouts who knew you violated treaty agreements and killed innocents to uncover your crimes." The chamber erupted in confusion. Governor Henderson rose, calling for order while trying to make sense of the disruption. Harrison's face darkened with barely controlled fury as he recognized Thomas. "This man is a renegade, responsible for attacks on settlers," Harrison shouted above the growing commotion. "His presence here proves Mrs. Blackwood's treason in collaborating with hostiles." Peterson seized this moment to signal the side door. It opened to admit the 4 Crow warriors, Stone Wolf, 2 Hawks, Running Elk, and Grey Feather, each carrying himself with dignified purpose that immediately commanded attention. Despite the chaotic atmosphere, 2 Hawks stepped forward, the treaty document held reverently before him. "We bring proof of General Harrison's crimes against both Crow people and United States government law," he announced in perfect English that shocked many present who expected savages incapable of such articulation. Governor Henderson, struggling to maintain control of the increasingly dramatic situation, made a crucial decision. "I will hear these accusations," he declared, silencing the chamber with his authoritative tone. "Bring forward your evidence." What followed was unlike anything Helena had witnessed in its brief history as territorial capital. Crow warriors, presenting documented evidence before the assembled government, military, and business leadership. 2 Hawks, translated as Stone Wolf, described in precise detail the events at Elkhorn Creek, supported by Grey Feather and Running Elk's eyewitness accounts. Thomas presented the treaty document, its official government seals and signatures unmistakably authentic, demonstrating Harrison's deliberate violations of federal agreements with the Crow Nation. Katherine provided testimony regarding Harrison's orchestration of attacks designed to appear as Crow raids, connections that several settlers present reluctantly confirmed from their own observations. Throughout this extraordinary proceeding, Harrison attempted multiple interruptions, his composure gradually deteriorating as the weight of evidence mounted against him. Senator Wilcox similarly tried to discredit the accusations, but the combined testimony proved too comprehensive, too specific to be easily dismissed. The final blow came when Peterson produced financial records obtained through his banking connections, documents showing substantial payments from mining companies to Harrison's personal accounts, coinciding precisely with military actions that opened contested territories to mining operations. As the evidence concluded, the chamber fell into stunned silence. Governor Henderson's expression had transformed from skeptical to deeply troubled over the course of the presentations. He studied the assembled evidence spread before him, then raised his gaze to Harrison. "General, these are the most serious accusations I've encountered in my tenure. What say you in your defense?" Harrison's response revealed the true character beneath his decorated exterior. Rather than addressing the specific evidence, he launched into a thundering condemnation of Indian sympathizers, undermining territorial security, of political interference in military matters essential to development, of naive sentimentality endangering settler families. His rhetoric might have swayed the audience in different circumstances, playing on deeply held fears and prejudices. But the concrete evidence before them, particularly the financial records showing his personal profit from the conflict he generated, created a reality even the most biased observer couldn't easily ignore. Governor Henderson listened to Harrison's increasingly desperate self-justification, then made his decision with the political acumen that had elevated him to his position. "General Harrison, I am immediately suspending you from command pending a full investigation into these allegations." He turned to his aide. "Send telegrams to Washington informing the War Department and Interior Department of these developments. Request a special investigator be dispatched immediately." To the Crow representatives, he added, "I will personally review the treaty violations and ensure renewed compliance with its terms. Pending federal confirmation, I am ordering all military operations in disputed territories suspended immediately." The governor's decisive action, while falling short of the immediate justice Red Hawk might have demanded, represented something perhaps more significant: official recognition of Crow grievances and concrete steps toward addressing Harrison's corruption. Katherine felt relief washing through her as the governor continued issuing directives: orders for Harrison's detention, arrangements for formal statements from all witnesses, and urgently messengers to Crow territory announcing the official response to prevent imminent hostilities. Thomas turned to her, his expression conveying both satisfaction at what they had achieved and recognition of its limitations. "First step only," he said quietly. "Long path to true justice still ahead." "But an essential first step," Katherine replied, "one that prevents immediate bloodshed and opens possibility for different future." Outside the government building, as the implications of what had transpired spread throughout Helena, Stone Wolf approached Katherine. Through Two Hawks' translation, he conveyed a message of profound significance. "Stone Wolf says you have earned the name Bridge Builder among our people, one who stands between worlds and makes crossing possible where only conflict existed before." The name resonated with Katherine's dream in the ancient cave. The woman standing between opposing forces, creating something unexpected where battle seemed inevitable. Not peace, precisely, but the possibility of it. A fragile opening that required ongoing courage to maintain and expand. As they prepared to depart, Helena, their mission accomplished just within Red Hawk's 7-day timeline, Katherine found herself contemplating what would come next. Her homestead near Clearwater Junction could never be home again, not after the choices she had made. Yet returning east to Pennsylvania held no appeal either. Thomas seemed to sense her uncertainty as they gathered their horses outside Peterson's. A home. "What path calls to you now, Katherine Blackwood?" he asked directly. She considered the question carefully before answering. "I'm not certain. Not my old life, certainly. But something between worlds, perhaps." A rare smile touched Thomas's features, transforming his normally stoic expression into something that revealed the remarkable spirit beneath. "Good place to build bridges," he observed. "Between world people needed now more than ever." In that moment, with Montana's vast sky stretching overhead and the future unwritten before her, Katherine recognized the truth in his words. The greatest. Frontiers weren't geographic but human, the challenging territories between cultures, between traditions, between ways of seeing and being in the world. Those were the wilderness areas that truly needed pioneers, willing to venture, where established paths didn't exist, creating new possibilities through courage, integrity, and the willingness to recognize humanity across boundaries others considered impenetrable. As they rode away from Helena, Katherine carried not just the governor's written assurances to present to Red Hawk, but a growing conviction about her own path forward. The perilous journey she and Thomas had undertaken had changed, something fundamental in how she perceived both herself and the complex world of the Montana Territory. Whatever came next, whether serving as intermediary between government and indigenous leaders, establishing a new healing practice that combined traditions, or some other path not yet visible, Katherine knew with bone-deep certainty that she had found purpose beyond mere survival. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.